Iraq's Prime Minister vows to defy any security challenges in the country and hold the first session of Parliament on July 1st. The leader of Iraq's northern Kurdish region lays claim to the oil-rich city of Kirkuk, saying it will not be returned to the central government. And Russia's president says that the association agreement between Kiev and the EU has effectively split Ukraine. Hello there, you're watching Al Ittijah World News and I'm Fatima Basim. Iraqi Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki has confirmed that his political bloc will attend the first session of the new elected parliament, scheduled to be held on July 1st. Iraq's politicians are due to form a new government following April's legislative elections, in which the Premier's ruling State of Law coalition won the most seats. Maliki's bloc, however, still requires the formation of a coalition to secure an outright majority.
In the beginning, they were betting on the failure of the elections. It has not succeeded. So they're now betting on the deteriorating security situation. Now they're betting on the postponement of Parliament's first session. They failed, and on July 1st we will be in Parliament, and all those who accept or reject this, like it or not, will be present in Parliament, defying the new political and security challenges. Therefore, they will try to stir up security problems through rumors and psychological war, or maybe through security violations.
Well, earlier, the Grand Ayatollah Sayyid Ali Sistani, Iraq's most influential cleric, called for the country's top political jobs to be filled by Tuesday of next week. Ayatollah Sistani's speech was read by his representative during the Friday sermon, where he called on Iraq's political blocs to agree on the new government's Prime Minister, Parliament Speaker and President.
After a presidential decree that called on members of the new parliament, who were elected on April 30th to convene for their first session next Tuesday, what is required of the political blocs is to agree on the 3 presidencies within the remaining days to this date.
Meanwhile, the president of Iraq's Kurdish region, Masoud Barzani, said that there would be no going back with regard to the autonomous Kurdish rule in oil-rich disputed city Kirkuk. The comments come during a joint press conference with the visiting British Foreign Secretary William Hague in Erbil, who repeated his calls for an inclusive government in Baghdad.
Indeed, we have waited for more than 10 years for the Iraqi federal government to address and solve the issue of these areas covered by Article 140, but it was of no avail. The Iraqi government forces that were in these areas have withdrawn, and they have left these areas, and it was a necessity for the Peshmerga forces to go in to provide protection, and also to prevent these areas from falling into the hands of terrorists. Now Article 140 has been accomplished, and we are not ready to talk about that.
We stand with you in rejecting the vile ideology and crimes of terrorists. And as in Baghdad yesterday, my message is the need to form an inclusive new government in Baghdad as soon as possible that can implement the most effective possible political and security response. We hope everyone, Shia, Sunni and Kurds, will join in making that happen, which will make it easier for the world to respond with assistance. And I welcome yesterday's announcement that the Iraqi Parliament will convene on the 1st of July, and I encourage all parties to attend that for the election of a new speaker and president, and for the process of a new broad-based government to be taken forward in line with the constitution.
And staying in Iraq, where the country's army launched an assault against the militant-held city of Tikrit a day after releasing video footage of soldiers in control of a strategic northern oil refinery in Baji. Iraqi troops are reportedly making headway against ISIS militants in Tikrit after the army used helicopters to storm the city's university campus. Fierce clashes engulfed the surrounding areas as government forces stormed additional insurgent positions. Well, according to Human Rights Watch, militants belonging to the so-called Islamic State in Iraq and Syria have executed at least 160 Iraqi captives this month in the country's northern city of Tikrit. The US-based human rights group said that fighters from the Al-Qaeda offshoot killed between 160 and 190 men in 2 locations in Tikrit over 3 days after they overran the city on June 11th. The group added that the number of victims could be much higher, but its inability to gain access to the area has prevented a thorough investigation. The United Nations Refugee Agency warned that as many as 10,000 people have fled the violence from predominantly Christian areas in northern Iraq. The UNHCR said they were leaving the largely Christian communities in Karakosh after mortar rounds landed close to the historic Assyrian town this week.
We're hearing mortars. They feared being targeted, because there are absolutely accounts of other incidents involving Christians whereby they were told they needed to convert or die. So certainly there is a widespread fear among the Christian community in this area. But in this particular case, there was no specific targeting, rather preemptive flight for fear of what would happen next.
Let's get our correspondent on the line now, who is standing by for us with the latest, Mustafa Qattan. Mustafa, what are you hearing? Will this first session of Parliament be held on July 1st?
Yes, actually, the Iraqi Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki today asserted that Hezbollah and the member of Hezbollah will be there in the first session in the new season of the Iraqi Parliament, even if the other partners, as he said, the Iraqi political figures will not attend the first session. Actually, he said that whoever will not attend this session and whoever will not be actually facilitate the job of the parliament and not come will be helping the militants to regain successful gains in Iraq. And also, the representative of the Grand Ayatollah Sayyid Sistani today, he reiterated that the political figures in Iraq need to reconcile and to unite against the militants, and to be able and to help the Iraqi forces to end the exist of the militants in Iraq. Yes.
Yes, and we are hearing reports that the Iraqi army is gearing for a major operation in Tikrit. What more can you tell us?
Well, actually, the Iraqi army, since yesterday, of course, and after the decisive military operation, the airborne operation in Tikrit, which actually resulted the capture of the Tikrit University. Now the Iraqi army has the upper hand in Tikrit and also in other cities in Salah ad-Din. Actually, also in Balad, in al-Haqi and in Samara, which is utterly secured and under the control of the Iraqi army. The Iraqi army now, yesterday he called the people in Tikrit to stay at their home in order to be safe, because the Iraqi army, with the support of the volunteers and the Iraqi Air Force, will launch a massive military operation to secure the city of Tikrit and to dislodge the militants there. Mr. Hakim al-Zamili, which he is a parliament member from Al-Halal bloc, he said Salah ad-Din province will be totally freed from the militants in the next few days. Yes.
All right, thank you for those updates, Mustafa Al-Qattan, our Iraq correspondent. As the Iraqi security crisis deepens, many questions have been posed. How strong are the militants from the Al-Qaeda offshoot of the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant in comparison to the Iraqi army? Will militants from ISIS be able to seize more territory? And how can major regional players help in ending this bloody conflict? The following report examines those issues further.
The crisis in Iraq, sparked by a lightning offensive by militants from the Al-Qaeda offshoot of the Islamic State of Iraq and Greater Syria, finds heavily armed players on opposite sides. But there is no clear military solution, and the conflict risks dragging on. The question remains, however, can ISIS keep pushing towards the capital, Baghdad? With 4,000 to 8,000 men, ISIS is not an incredibly large organization, but it's very well trained. It does not rely on tanks or other mechanized forces to achieve victory, making it hard for air power to deal a decisive blow. Until now, ISIS has primarily made inroads in Sunni Arab areas. However, military experts believe it will face a much tougher fight as it approaches Baghdad and the Shiite heartland. As militants edge closer to the capital, they will face stronger divisions of the Iraqi army. Those divisions are loyal to Iraqi Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki. They are stationed in and around Baghdad, Ba'quba and some portions of Diyala province. On the other side, another question can be raised. Can Iraq's army regain lost ground? On paper, Iraq has a fearsome army, a budget of $17 billion, 193,000 men, more than 330 tanks, 3,700 armored troop carriers, and 26 Mi-17 attack helicopters. Baghdad is also awaiting the delivery of 36 F-16 fighter jets and 24 Apache helicopters. Military experts believe that the size and the strength of the Iraqi army is not the problem. It outmans and outguns ISIS by orders and magnitude. Rather, the Iraqi army's problem involves leadership and morale. Another key player are the Kurds. The Kurdish Peshmerga forces, 35,000 of them integrated in the Iraqi army, are well trained and equipped by the United States and Russia. Another 80,000 to 240,000 fighters are at the disposal of Masoud Barzani, the president of Iraq's semi-autonomous Kurdish region. Positioned within striking distance of key ISIS strongholds, the Kurdish forces could play a major role to help resolve the crisis. But the question remains, will they agree to work with Maliki side by side, or will they take advantage of their military gains and later transform them into political achievements?
Let's now speak to political analyst Bassem Abu Dabigh about the ongoing crisis in Iraq. Mr. Abu Dabigh, will the Iraqi government challenge President Barzani's calls for Kirkuk, or do they already have too much on their plate?
Actually, from the beginning of the new political project in Iraq, the Kurd, which is our partner in the country, try to dominate and blackmail the central government, and they get help also by other country, which is neighboring country. In Iraq is the total number of the army and all security officer and other organization which is belong to the security defense minister and others, which is 1,030,000. We are in Iraq 18 cities. 3 cities belong to the Kurd. The Kurd actually gaining of this million is 200,000. That means 800,000 they got responsibility for 15 major cities in Iraq. That number is not enough, but as I said, the Kurd been dominating this. We are in crisis at the moment. What the Kurdish hunting, they getting Kirkuk, which is Kirkuk under Article 140 from Iraqi constitution law, which is because it's difficulty to say who is the majority, who is the minority in Kirkuk. And also Kirkuk is an oil city. They get support from Turkey and other country, and also Israel been gaining from that and benefiting from this influence. They get in $65 a barrel, which is a cheap oil. That also to get support. Also, American, they never object on this movement. Every time and every day from the capture of Mosul and then dominating Kirkuk by the Peshmerga army. Barzani every day he make a conference and saying we are now in a different map, we are in a position not before the capture of the Mosul. Nobody actually, even when John Kerry visited Kurdistan or the United Kingdom foreign minister, same thing and same thinking he been repeating. That means he's dominating and taking Kirkuk and actually destroying all the Iraqi agreement between the central government about Kirkuk. Kirkuk is a city, there is an Arab Sunni and Arab Shia, and majority in Kirkuk is a Turk Shia. And also there is a Kurd, and also the Kurdish, which is the Kurdistani autonomous, they've been making, increasing the residency of the Kurd, actually to make, when they have a count in the numbers, that they try to make the Kurd is majority in Kirkuk. This plan means all the time also Al-Ja'fari, which is one of the Iraqi prime minister, he lost his seat because of disagreement with the Kurd about that. Since Condoleezza Rice time, when she was the foreign minister of the United States. This thing actually also, if we can say, now we have a security fight which is ISIL. ISIL is established and created part of the Al-Qaeda terrorism, established in Syria. In Syria, the American at the moment supporting ISIL. In Iraq, they are against. I don't know, is this double standard make the movement of the thinking? Also the Kurd is part of the Iraq. They're supposed to be unite with Iraq and helping Iraqi because they are part of the Iraq.
So yes. Does this mean that the Kurds will form a government with Baghdad next week, or will they seek autonomy?
To be honest, you see, is by the Iraqi constitution law, 1st of July will be all the Iraqi members being elected by the last election. They have to go by the date which is fixed by the Iraqi president to go and actually elect is the chairman and the two duty of the chairman, which is two members, which is as normally one Kurd and one Shia. This one, which is the leader, will be Sunni. Unfortunately, to name this, but is happening from the last. That's the last elected in the new political project in Iraq. But at the moment, what we can see, there is a one package is going to be who is going to be the prime minister, who is going to be the chairman, and who is going to be the president of Iraq. These three major places, it's also been divided. Sunni, the chairman, Iraqi Sunni, and Shia prime minister, Iraqi Shia prime minister, and Kurdish is a president. This, to change this format, you need to have a lot of negotiation before, and because we have in a short time, and Ayatollah Sistani also encouraging to have the fix and do the meeting in that date. That means there is a lot of things also is from the behavior of the last chairman in Iraq, which is a Najafi, is not accepted anymore by some group in Iraq. This will put in the situation too complicated. Also, you have the influence from other country, which is the John Kerry, when he visited Iraq, he tried to give message to all over international community. That means he can actually make changes in the Iraqi political project, which is no. America lost that influence after they not allowed to leave bases in Iraq. America, their dream to run the Middle East from Iraq, but slowly this dream is impossible. Now America tried to, I don't know, maybe this is the only thing I can think at the moment about, is the security of Israel is number one, or a figure for America ambition at the moment. Also, the Saudi Arabia ally supporting petrodollar to all these IS to destroy Iraqi unity. Also, there is a plan which is he couldn't success Joe Biden when the American forces used to be based in Iraq before the withdrawal after 2011, tried to divide Iraq to three groups, which is Sunni and Kurdi and Shia. He failed because a lot of things also tried to make things also similarity to Syrian next door country, to divide Syria. That failing make things very difficult. But there is a dream of the Kurdish and the Sunni, which is Najafi, try to use Daesh to dominate Al-Mosul and make his own empire. This is also, now we can see in the next days, we can see a lot of things. At the beginning, we thought is a politics movement to make a pressure to the Al-Maliki because he was asking is a majority government, which is he gained 95 seats in the parliament. But now, is this movement either going to change the Al-Maliki ambition, or we are going to see
Okay, I'm going to have to leave it there. Thank you for speaking to Al-Ittijah political analyst Bassem Abu Tawiq.
Thank you very much.
The Syrian government has scored fresh gains in their fight against foreign-backed militants, capturing strategically important areas near the Lebanese border. Syrian security officials say troops managed to reach the edge of the border town of Tufail in the Qalamun region, adding that the soldiers are now approaching the mountain resort of Zabadani, which has been under the control of militants for over 2 years. Meanwhile, heavy clashes are continuing further north in Aleppo, with fighting reported at a government checkpoint in Hama. Meanwhile, US President Barack Obama has called on Congress to approve a $500 million military aid package to train and equip Syria's armed opposition groups. The move marks a significant escalation of US involvement in a 3-year-old conflict.
For more than 3 years, any decision that Washington has tried to portray as a pacifying move in conflict-torn Syria has only aggravated the already detrimental situation. Now the US administration is about to pour an additional $500 million to further exacerbate the Syrian conflict.
I will work with Congress to ramp up support for those in the Syrian opposition who offer the best alternative to terrorists and brutal dictators.
Less than a month since making this pledge, US President Barack Obama asked Congress lawmakers to allocate $500 million to train and equip those whom the White House described as moderate opposition and whom Obama himself conceded have failed to change anything on the ground.
Suddenly, to overturn not only Assad but also ruthless, highly trained jihadists, if we just sent a few arms, is a fantasy.
In hindsight, these remarks may indicate that the latest installment will be dedicated to provide militants with lethal means to fight other militias wreaking havoc on Syrian soil. Obama's national security advisor Susan Rice has recently acknowledged that the Pentagon has been providing such support to anti-government militants. On Friday, a scheduled meeting between US Secretary of State John Kerry and head of the Syrian National Coalition Ahmed Jaba in the Saudi city of Jeddah is expected to look into the merits of the so-called Free Syrian Army, which upon hearing the news coming out of Washington, decided to sack its military command for corruption claims, a move that adds to the controversy surrounding groups supported by the US and its allies.
Well, the US Secretary of State John Kerry did hold that meeting with the leader of the Syrian National Coalition, Ahmed Jaba. The US top diplomat said that Syria's so-called moderate opposition could play a role in pushing back extremist militants.
Obviously, in light of what has happened in Iraq, We have even more to talk about in terms of the moderate opposition in Syria, which has the ability to be a very important player in pushing back against ISIL's presence, as they have been, not just in Syria, but also in Iraq. President Jarba represents a tribe that reaches right into Iraq. He knows the people there, and his point of view and the Syrian opposition's will be very important going forward. So we're also at a moment of increased effort with the opposition, so I look forward to this chance to speak to President Jarba and to share some thoughts.
As the Obama administration continues to face criticism over its drone program, a new report states that the drone technology and the way the United States uses it has the potential to destabilize battlefields, governments, and even America's so-called democracy.
The last 4 years, my administration has worked vigorously to establish a framework that governs our use of force against terrorists, insisting upon clear guidelines, oversight, and accountability that is now codified in presidential policy guidance that I signed yesterday.
It's been a year since U.S. President Barack Obama promised to curtail force against extremist militants through the use of drones, due to the increasing number of innocent civilians being killed. But little has changed since that speech.
All right. We will stop again. All right.
Pakistan, Somalia, and where else?
Please remove that
CIA
woman.
and the Obama administration refuse to even tell Congress. They won't even tell Congress what countries we are killing children in.
Please.
Since then, the calls for reform only grew louder, and Obama continues to face harsh criticism from human rights activists over his drone program. And now there is growing pressure on the White House from within the U.S. government. A new report released by the Stimson Center, a Washington, D.C. think tank, which includes former U.S. military officials, surveyed the Obama administration's use of drones and concluded that they could interfere with the sovereignty of other nations and cause unnecessary conflicts abroad. The report states, "We are concerned that the Obama administration's heavy reliance on targeted killings as a pillar of U.S. counterterrorism strategy rests on questionable assumptions and risks increasing instability and escalating conflicts. One of the biggest problems, according to the report, is the potential for U.S. drone use to destabilize legal and moral norms worldwide." The panel also condemned the Obama administration for being overly secretive about its drone programs, calling for a nonpartisan independent commission to review lethal UAV policy, and urging it to transfer responsibility for carrying out drone strikes from the more secretive CIA to the more transparent military. The U.S. has long been criticized for its lethal drone policy by various human rights groups. A late May study by the Bureau of Investigative Journalism said 2/3 of all U.S. drone strikes in Pakistan over the past decade targeted domestic buildings. In March, a UN human rights report called for a public explanation of 30 U.S. drone attacks, which allegedly resulted in civilian casualties. The drone program has claimed the lives of over 2,400 people in at least 4 countries over the course of the past 5 years.
Hundreds of people took part in the funeral procession for 2 Palestinian men who were killed during an Israeli airstrike on the Gaza Strip. The 2 Palestinians were said to have been members of the Popular Resistance Committees. Earlier in the day, 5 Palestinians were also wounded by Israeli tank fire, which targeted 2 mosque minarets east of Khan Yunis in southern Gaza. The violence comes as Israeli occupation forces carried on with their massive search operations for 3 Zionist settlers who disappeared from the southern West Bank on June 12. This as hundreds of Israeli Arabs clashed with occupation forces during a protest in the northern Arab town of Al-Fahim. Protest organizations said that they were demonstrating against the Israeli entity's policy of so-called administrative detention, under which Palestinians are jailed without trial or charge. On the forefront, the U.S. Special Envoy to the Mideast, Bulletin, has resigned after nearly a year of unsuccessful efforts to forge a so-called Israeli-Palestinian peace deal. As the United States' former ambassador to Tel Aviv, Dyke was appointed to the post last July by U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry, who brokered the latest round of talks. You're watching Al Ittijah World News, still to come. Thousands marched through the Afghan capital in protest over alleged election fraud. Welcome back to Al Ittijah World News. Here's a reminder of our top stories. Iraq's Prime Minister vows to defy any security challenges in the country and hold the first session of Parliament on July 1st. The leader of Iraq's northern Kurdish region lays claim to the oil-rich city of Kirkuk, saying that it will not be returned to the central government. And Russia's president says that the association agreement between Kiev and the EU has effectively split Ukraine. Ukraine has signed an association pact with the EU that has been the turning point which triggered unrest and a political crisis in the country. Russia, for its part, warned of serious ensuing consequences as a result of that economic agreement.
After months of political instability, Ukraine finally pulled the trigger by signing association accords with the EU, while muzzling the sound of protests coming from the east of the country. Ukraine's newly elected president Petro Poroshenko inked a deal with the European Union in Brussels alongside Georgia and Moldova, which are also former Soviet states.
Over the last month, Ukraine paid the highest possible price to make her European dreams come true. It must be worth something, for instance, to finally consider a simple statement of the part of the EU. Once Ukraine will be ready, it will be in. A statement that could cost the EU nothing, but would mean the world of my country.
The Kremlin expressed its objection over the signing of the EU pact, warning of grave repercussions should it affect its local market. Russian Deputy Foreign Minister Grigory Karasin said that the consequences of the signing by Ukraine and Moldova will certainly be serious, but added that the signing of such a serious document is, of course, a sovereign right of any state. Shortly after Kiev signed an association accord with the European Union, Russian President Vladimir Putin said that the move has polarized Ukraine.
The unconstitutional revolution in Kiev attempts to force on the Ukrainian people an artificial choice between Europe and Russia, brought the society to the split, to the painful internal confrontation.
This EU trade pact triggered violent protests in Kiev earlier this year that led to the ouster of President Viktor Yanukovych, who bailed on the deal, opting instead for a better offer from Russia. Pro-Moscow separatists, for their part, have voiced their opposition to the signing of the agreement as it distances Ukraine further away from Russia. Yet pro-Western Poroshenko, who was elected to replace Yanukovych, has disregarded calls from the east of the country to refrain from going through with this integration, which is full of economic and political risks, and does not even guarantee EU membership.
To discuss this issue further, let's speak to political analyst Chris Bambury. Now, Mr. Bambury, while President Poroshenko is upholding a ceasefire in eastern Ukraine, wouldn't this EU trade deal further aggravate the situation in the east?
I think it aggravates it immensely. From the Russian point of view, the fact that both Ukraine, Moldova and indeed Georgia have signed this accord with the EU must be quite a dangerous step, because it's also known that membership of the EU tacitly requires membership of NATO. Georgia is a member of NATO already, so the implication is that Ukraine and Moldova will be following Georgia into NATO. So the agreement with the EU is a first step towards that, and that is a major threat from Moscow. Secondly, as well, Poroshenko was involved in discussions with both Moscow and the pro-Russian insurgents in eastern Ukraine over various ceasefires, which all sides look towards coming to some agreement on. That now seems to be really in danger because of this agreement with trade association with the EU. The Russians' immediate response is to say they're not going to take economic sanctions against Ukraine. They expect the Ukrainian economy to hit trouble as a consequence of this, because the price of this agreement, this is not membership of the European Union, it's an association where Ukraine opens itself up to free trade with the European Union, which will hit its various industries, but also has to accept austerity measures and various other free market measures. And that will have severe economic consequences, the kind of which we've seen in Greece and elsewhere. So Russia have already said they're prepared to wait. But I think in the short term, I doubt there is going to be an extension of the ceasefires. I think if the rebels in Ukraine, this is a real casus belli. This is going to be a continuation of the fighting. And the scale of that was seen by the reports by the United Nations of some 110 refugees, mainly in Russia. A figure the United States is disputed, but no one else is. The scale of that suggests that really the fighting is now beginning to move out of control. And I think what needed to be done was far from moving towards some trade agreement with the European Union. Poroshenko would have been better pursuing peace negotiations, ceasefire negotiations with both Moscow and with the rebels in eastern Ukraine, who are not entirely under the control of Vladimir Putin.
Will this EU trade deal benefit ordinary Ukrainians in any way who are already beginning to feel the strict measures imposed by the IMF?
Well, of course, as with people in Eastern Europe in 1990, 1989, when the Berlin Wall came down, who believed they were going to get kind of German living standards as a consequence of this, people in Ukraine who are in desperate straits are desperate to believe that association with the European Union will mean membership of the European Union. That is not for grabs at the moment. But secondly, I think are turning away from what the consequences will be, which is the sorts of, as I said, of austerity program being imposed on Ukraine, similar to that imposed on Greece, with huge increase in unemployment, destruction of services, of pensions, and so on. And that is what's coming on tap in the Ukraine as a consequence of that. And similarly, a breakdown of trade and other things with Russia, who supply Ukraine with gas and oil. Therefore, I think in the short to medium term, the consequences are going to be quite dire. And I want to repeat, this is not membership of the European Union. That is not on offer from the EU to the people of Ukraine. This is association. It's the worst of all worlds, where really the Ukraine will have no say over economic and social matters being imposed in it from Brussels.
All right, thank you for sharing your thoughts on this, political analyst Chris Bambury. As a ceasefire holding back Ukrainian forces and pro-Russian separatists from engaging in fierce fighting nears its expiry, Kiev is considering extending the truce with Russia's backing, amid hope that peace talks will produce a solution to the crisis in the east.
Ukrainian President Petro Poroshenko is mulling the extension of a ceasefire between Kiev's forces and pro-Russian activists in the east of the country before its expiration on Friday.
We have to conduct consultations with the Minister of Defense, the Defense Council and the heads of the General Staff, and the other people from the National Security Council. But of course this time will be up on the 27th, today at 10 p.m, so the decision will be taken today.
Moscow said it would welcome a ceasefire extension as long as it is not merely a brief postponement of further military action by Kiev.
If it is really confirmed that the ceasefire has really been extended by 72 hours, then this fact should be welcomed. But we hope that it does not mean just a postponement of the ultimatum for 3 days.
While Russian President Vladimir Putin has called for a long-term ceasefire as well as peace talks between Kiev and representatives from the eastern regions, Ukrainian politicians have demanded martial law to be imposed in Donetsk and Luhansk.
Most importantly, the securing of a long-term ceasefire as a necessary condition for substantive talks between the authorities in Kiev and representatives of the southeastern regions.
I'm convinced that now, after the expiration of Ukraine's unilateral peaceful initiative, we need to introduce martial law in parts of the Donetsk and Luhansk regions.
As peace talks between Ukraine's warring sides continued, the representatives from the eastern regions have agreed to extend the ceasefire until June 30th and release the 4 detained OSCE observers.
The ceasefire has been so far very unsuccessful, but nevertheless it was a certain pretext to continue dialogue. Therefore, we confirm on our side the extension of the ceasefire for the same duration. Yesterday, we managed to release 4 out of the 8 previously detained OSCE observers. We promise in the next few days to release 4 more OSCE observers.
But as talks got underway, 4 Ukrainian soldiers were killed and 5 others wounded during clashes with separatists in the east. Yet, it's not only pro-Moscow activists who have taken up arms in the country, as pro-Kiev militias fighting in the east say they have the president's back.
We hope that the president will pay attention to the fact that he has people to rely upon. We are a group that will take orders from him. We would like to be his right hand here and defend Ukrainian authorities.
The situation in Ukraine has spiraled out of control ever since ousted President Viktor Yanukovych scrapped an EU trade deal for a better offer presented by Russia. Now, the UN has estimated that some 110,000 people have fled to Russia from Ukraine, and more than 54,000 others have been internally displaced since the start of 2014, most of them from the Russian-speaking East, where residents identify with neighboring Russia rather than Ukraine.
The Lebanese army said it has seized material used to make explosive belts during a raid in the country's north. The army broke into several homes in northern Lebanon and seized dynamite sticks, mortar bombs and hand grenade detonators. Security forces have been on high alert after 3 suicide bombings in less than a week rattled the country. Bahraini political prisoners have called for the boycott of Manama's judiciary system, saying that it only serves for covering up torture against thousands of detainees. Detained activists in Bahrain's dry dock prison accused the regime of using the judiciary to conceal the systematic torture and cruel treatment of detainees. This as protests continued across the Persian Gulf state, demanding the downfall of the government. Amnesty International has condemned a Saudi court decision to jail a human rights activist for 7 years, labelling the charges as bogus. The international rights group has urged the sentence of Fawzan al-Harbi to be quashed, saying he was ruthlessly targeted for daring to question the Saudi authorities' human rights record. The passengers and crew of the missing Malaysian Airlines flight MH370 most likely died from suffocation, according to a new report released by Australian officials. In that 55-page report, the Australian Transport Safety Board outlined how investigators had arrived at this conclusion after comparing the conditions on the flight with previous disasters. The report also indicated that the plane most likely crashed further south into the Indian Ocean. A large explosion at a state-owned gas pipeline in southern India has killed at least 16 people and injured several others. Local officials said that a gas leakage occurred when villagers in Andhra Pradesh state were asleep. Rescue and relief operations are underway as firefighters work to extinguish the blaze caused by the blast. Afghan presidential candidate Abdullah Abdullah led several thousand demonstrators through the country's capital, Kabul. The latest unrest comes amid allegations of election fraud, which has risen questions over whether Afghanistan will be able to complete its first ever peaceful democratic transition of power.
Afghan presidential candidate Abdullah Abdullah appeared at a mass rally in the capital Kabul, where thousands of his supporters gathered in a show of support for his allegations of mass fraud during the runoff vote by organizers and state officials. Abdullah has vowed to reject the election result, saying he was the victim of massive ballot box rigging in the June 14 poll, with vote counting reportedly placing him far behind his rival Ashraf Ghani. Death to Ashraf Ghani, death to the Election Commission, Abdullah's supporters chanted as he was carried through the rowdy crowds on the roof of a truck.
We are protesting here for our future and to defend the right of our votes.
Friday's protest was the largest since the fraud dispute erupted and was the first that Abdullah attended, sending a public signal that could fuel further angry demonstrations and increase the risk of civil unrest. Abdullah went into the second round runoff election widely seen as the favorite to succeed President Hamid Karzai, who came to power after the Taliban regime was ousted by a US-led invasion in 2001 as part of America's so-called war on terror. But Ghani is reported to be well ahead in the counting, provoking claims of fraud from Abdullah and his supporters.
Hamid Karzai is elected president of Afghanistan, so we are requesting him to help the reality and accept the reality. And the international community must accept the reality and must support Afghan nation, not a single individual.
Preliminary election results are due on July the 2nd, and the final result, after the adjudication of complaints, is scheduled to be announced on July the 22nd.
All right, here's a recap of tonight's top stories. Iraq's Prime Minister vows to defy any security challenges in the country and hold the first session of Parliament on July 1st. The leader of Iraq's northern Kurdish region lays claim to the oil-rich city of Kirkuk, saying that it will not be returned to the central government. And Russia's president says that the association agreement between Kiev and the EU has effectively split Ukraine. Well, that's all from me and the Al News team. Thank you for watching and good night.